If you're settling in, getting comfortable, and letting the day slowly drift away, then let me gently take you to a quiet place in the American hills, a place where time moves softly, and old stories rest like dust on still air. Tonight, we're visiting Gold Hill, a peaceful corner of the country that once echoed with the steady rhythm of pickaxes, wagon wheels, and friendly voices from long ago. The gold mine there hasn't been alive with workers for many, many years, but the stories, those stayed. Some people say that if you stand near the old entrance at dusk, you might hear a soft tap echoing deep inside. Others say they've heard slow footsteps, the kind that sound patient and unhurried, as if someone from the past is still taking their time walking home. And some believe the mine simply carries the memories of the people who spent their lives in those tunnels, and the stones haven't forgotten their voices. But don't worry, this isn't a frightening story, this is a sleepy story, a gentle walk through quiet history. The kind of tale where the ghosts, if they exist at all, are just peaceful echoes of a world long gone. So take a breath, let your shoulders settle, and come with me to the cool, still air of Gold Hill, where the mind sleeps now, and where the past whispers softly, like a lullaby carried through stone. Before Gold Hill became a town with lantern lights, wagon tracks, and the soft ring of metal tools, it was simply a quiet stretch of American hillside. Long before miners arrived, the land rested in a slow, peaceful rhythm. The hills were gentle, rounded by time and weather, and the air carried the smell of pine, dry earth, and warm sunlight. If you were to stand there in those early days, before the first shovel touched the ground, you would see a landscape that looked almost unchanged for centuries. Small birds fluttered between low trees. Thin streams ran down from the higher ridges, moving lazily over smooth stones. On calm evenings, fog slipped into the valleys like a quiet blanket, settling over the grass and deepening the stillness. Everything felt unhurried, like the land itself was taking long, steady breaths. There were a few families scattered across the region then, farmers, trappers, travelers who enjoyed the open land and the easy pace of living so far from the noise of early American cities. Their cabins were simple, made from rough-cut wood that creaked gently in the wind. These families lived by daylight, rising with the sun and ending their work when the sky grew dark. They told stories around small fires, shared simple meals, and listened to the sounds of the night, crickets, owls, and the slow sigh of wind through the grass. No one imagined that the hills held anything more than soil, rock, and quiet beauty. No one knew that deep below their feet, glittering veins of gold rested in the dark, completely undisturbed, untouched by tools, and hidden beneath layers of stone that had never been broken. But all of that would change with one small discovery, a discovery that began, like many things in American history, with a single ordinary day. Most of the early settlers didn't come looking for gold. They came to hunt, to farm, or to make a new life in a peaceful place. Still, people explored the streams, looking for fresh water or good fishing spots. And it was along one of those small streams, barely more than an ankle-deep trickle, that something caught the light. It was early morning. The sun had just risen enough to touch the surface of the water with a warm, golden glow. The stream moved gently over a bed of stones, each smooth from years of flowing water. As a settler leaned down to take a drink, he noticed a tiny sparkle beneath the ripples. He reached into the cool water, lifted a stone, and held it up to the sun. There, caught in the rough texture of the rock, was a faint, metallic gleam. He didn't think much of it at first. Tiny flashes in river stones weren't rare. But something about this one felt different, slightly brighter, slightly heavier, slightly more promising. The man brought it back to his cabin, placed it by the fire, and showed it to a few neighbors. They turned it in their hands, studying it in the warm glow. Quiet hums and thoughtful frowns filled the room as they passed it around. The next morning, they returned to the stream to look again, this time with more curiosity, more careful eyes. After searching through the shallow water and lifting a handful of stones, they found another piece. And then another. Small, but bright. Bright enough to stir a sense of wonder. Word spread slowly at first. Just among neighbors, then across a few valleys, then to travelers who stopped for supplies. By the time the story reached a group of prospectors passing through the area, the picture had already grown. Some folks found gold in those hills. And that was all it took. Prospectors arrived with simple tools, pans, shovels, picks. They waded into the cool streams, swirling water in broad metal pans, watching the heavier particles settle. Day after day, small flakes of gold shimmered at the bottom of those pans. Not a lot, not enough to make anyone rich overnight, but enough to say one thing clearly: there was gold in Gold Hill. More people came. Tents appeared. Simple wooden shacks were hammered together piece by piece. A few rough paths became the first dirt roads. Horses and wagons rolled through the clearing, bringing food, tools, and families who hoped to build a future in this new place. Still, even with all the activity, the land stayed quiet in a way. The hills rose calmly around the growing camp. The air remained cool and clear in the early mornings, drifting through the tall grasses. The settlers may have been busy, but the land seemed patient, accepting their presence without much change in its old, gentle rhythm. At night, the hills stretched into the darkness like soft shadows, and the new settlers gathered around campfires. They talked about the pieces of gold they had found that day, the shapes of the streams, the places where the soil felt promising. Children fell asleep early, rocked gently by the sounds of crackling firewood and the murmur of adult voices. Dogs lay close by, quiet and still, as if listening to the natural peace that the hills had always known. In the middle of all this calm activity, none of the settlers suspected that the ground beneath them held deeper secrets. They didn't yet know that the gold they found in the streams came from veins hidden far underground. They didn't know that those veins would soon draw people into the dark earth with hope, ambition, and eventually, legends. For now, life in early Gold Hill was simple. Days were long but steady. The mornings were cool, the afternoons were warm, and the evenings carried the soft smell of pine smoke from small cook fires. People shared stories, shared food, and shared dreams. And the land remained peaceful. With no hint of the strange sounds and quiet mysteries that would one day give the place its name in whispered tales, Gold Hill was just beginning. The gold was waiting, and the mine, still untouched, was silent, sleeping beneath the earth like a story yet to be told. As more prospectors arrived and more small flecks of gold were gathered from the streams and hillsides, Gold Hill began to shift from a quiet clearing into a small but lively settlement. Yet even as the activity grew, there was still a peaceful rhythm to everything, as if the land encouraged people to move slowly and steadily, never rushing, never pushing too hard. The earliest miners were simple workers. They rose before the sun, stretching their arms in the cool morning air, breathing in the soft scent of pine and damp soil. Their clothes were worn and dusty, their tools were few but familiar: shovels, pickaxes, pans, and wooden buckets. They didn't talk much at dawn. Instead, they listened to the gentle sounds around them: footsteps in the grass, the distant flutter of birds, the low creak of wagon axles as people started their day. Once the light grew strong enough to work by, the miners spread out along the hills and streambeds. You could see them in small clusters, bending over the water, circling their pans with slow, practiced motion. Swish, swirl, settle. Swish, swirl, settle. The rhythm was steady, almost like a calming heartbeat. Some men hummed under their breath. Others worked in silence, letting the soft sounds of nature fill their ears while the tiny specks of gold settled at the bottom of their pans. Even with all the labor, the early days felt hopeful. The community was small and close-knit. People shared food when supplies ran low. They helped patch each other's tents, fix wagon wheels, or haul water from the creek. Children ran between the cabins and workshops, collecting firewood or simply chasing one another beneath the tall trees. In the evenings, families gathered around fires, where beans simmered in iron pots and the smell of cornmeal bread drifted through the cool air. But for all the calm above ground, whispers had already begun to stir about what lay beneath the earth. The miners found small gold flakes in the water, but the experienced among them knew what it meant. The real source had to be deeper. Somewhere inside the hills, veins of gold were waiting in the dark, untouched and unexplored. And so, slowly, the talk of digging a true mine began. The first attempts were simple, a few shallow holes, barely more than widened burrows. But every shovel full of soil revealed subtle signs: quartz rock, small nuggets, traces of gold dust. The miners realized they were close to something larger. They needed to go deeper. That was when they began carving a path straight into the hillside. Their early tools were basic, and they moved at an unhurried pace. Hours passed with slow strikes of the pickaxe, the soft crumble of dirt, and the scrape of stone. They propped wooden beams into place as they dug, adjusting them with careful hands. The tunnels were narrow, just wide enough for one man to stand with his shoulders slightly turned. Lanterns flickered against rough rock walls, casting warm gold light that made the shadows sway like gentle waves. Inside these first tunnels, the air felt cool and still. Dust drifted lazily in the lamplight, settling on sleeves, hair, and tools. The miners' voices echoed in a low, smooth way, bouncing softly down the unfinished passageways. Every sound was stretched and softened, as if the earth swallowed the noise and returned only a quiet whisper. It was around this time that the earliest stories began. Nothing dramatic. Nothing frightening. Just small, quiet things that made the miners pause for a moment. A soft tap on stone when no one was swinging a pick, the faint scuff of a footstep just around a corner, a gentle echo that sounded almost like someone breathing or lightly clearing their throat. The miners didn't take these sounds too seriously. Anyone familiar with tunnels knew that rock shifted. Earth settled. Moisture slid down stone walls in tiny droplets. But still, the sounds were noticed. Noted. Passed along in small conversations as people rested or ate their meals. Did you hear that tapping today? Probably just the wall shifting. Yeah. Probably. Above ground, life remained peaceful. A few small shops appeared, simple structures with wooden signs that hung gently in the breeze. One sold dried meats and flour. Another offered boots, rope, and lanterns. A blacksmith set up a forge, and the ringing of his hammer was one of the few sharp sounds in the settlement. Even so, the noise felt comforting, steady, and warm, echoing across the clearing like a heartbeat for the town. Nights were calm and cool. Miners sat together around fires, their faces lit in soft orange light as they shared stories from home or talked about their discoveries. Some spoke of dreams for the future, a larger house, a bit of land, enough gold to bring their loved ones west. Others were simply happy to be part of a new community, living in a place where every day felt like the start of something promising. And still, the mine grew slowly. Inch by inch. Foot by foot. The tunnels extended deeper into the hillside, always guided by lantern light and steady hands. The miners worked side by side, never rushing, always listening to the soft, subtle sounds of the earth around them. As the mine deepened, the echoes grew stronger. Not louder, just more noticeable. A long, drawn-out echo after a shout. A distant clink when no one was working. A faint murmur that might have been wind, or something else, but again, nothing felt dangerous. Instead, the mine carried a kind of calm mystery, the sort that made men pause and tilt their heads, listening with a slight smile rather than fear. Life continued this way for several seasons. The town expanded little by little. More families arrived, more cabins were built, and more stories began to circulate. The community was peaceful and content. The gold was steady, and the work, though hard, felt meaningful, yet beneath it all, the mine was slowly becoming something more than a workplace. It was becoming a place full of soft echoes, unanswered sounds, and quiet stories that the people of Gold Hill would soon tell for generations. It was becoming the heart of the town, a calm, breathing presence beneath the hills, and soon, the legends would grow. As the seasons drifted gently across the hills, Gold Hill grew into a small but steady community. The mine had become part of everyday life, like the morning sun or the cool breeze that drifted through the trees. People worked during the day, shared meals in the evenings, and rested under wide, star-filled skies at night. But while the life above ground stayed simple and peaceful, something else was forming below, something quieter, softer, and stranger. It began with the little stories. The harmless ones. The ones miners told half smiling, half shrugging, unsure if they really believed them. When men came back from the tunnels, they often shared the sounds they had heard in the deep dark. At first, it was just small things, a tap, a clink, a faint shuffle, a distant murmur, probably the rock shifting, the men would say. Or drafts in the tunnel. Yet, after hearing these things again and again, the stories began to take shape. And stories, especially in a small town, have a way of growing roots. One miner claimed he heard what sounded like someone clearing their throat just behind him. When he turned, lantern held high, the tunnel behind him was empty, nothing but dust shimmering in the warm glow. Another miner swore he heard slow footsteps, as if someone was walking with a slight limp. The sound was faint but steady, crunching softly on loose gravel. The moment the miner stopped to listen more closely, the footsteps stopped too. That's how echoes work, the foreman said. He didn't sound convinced. Then there were the voices, not loud, not sharp, but distant and muffled, like someone speaking through a wall of thick stone. No words anyone could understand. Just the suggestion of a voice drifting from deeper in the tunnels. Still, none of this frightened the miners. If anything, it gave them something to talk about during long work breaks. And because the stories were quiet, gentle, and vague, they made the mine feel less empty, almost alive in a calm, ancient way. When people gathered around campfires at night, the stories seemed to settle among the orange sparks drifting up into the sky. Men leaned back on wooden stools, stretched their tired legs, and spoke in slow, thoughtful tones. you think someone's down there? Nah, just the tunnel breathing. Feels like the place listens sometimes. Yeah. I felt that too. It wasn't fear, it was curiosity, it was the sense that the mine had its own personality, built from stone, silence, and the memories of the work done each day. As Gold Hill grew, more families arrived, bringing warmth, laughter, and children who played in the golden afternoon light. They ran down the dirt roads, rolled hoops, chased chickens, and listened to the adult stories without fully understanding them. Kids would ask questions. The kind only children ask, what does a talking rock sound like? Do the tunnels get lonely? Can a ghost dig for gold? The adults would laugh softly and shake their heads. There are no ghosts, they'd say. But they said it gently, with a tone that left just a bit of room for wonder, and that was how the earliest legends began, not with fear, not with danger, but with the soft, simple belief that the mine held something more than rock. In time, the local shopkeepers began hearing these stories as well. When miners came in for supplies, lantern oil, spare boots, rope, or tools, they spoke casually about the day's work. Sometimes they mentioned the odd sounds. The shopkeepers nodded slowly, listening while they wrapped goods in brown paper or measured flour into cloth bags. Soon, even travelers passing through Gold Hill heard the whispers. They would stop at the general store or the small tavern, sip warm broth or weak coffee, and ask the locals about the mine. The townspeople didn't embellish the stories. They didn't turn them into grand tales. They just shared the small truths, the taps, the footsteps, the murmurs, and the strange sense that the tunnels weren't as empty as they seemed. The legends grew slowly, like vines climbing up an old fence. Never rushed. Never dramatic. Just steady and natural. Even the mine workers started to give names to certain sounds. A slow scrape became the walker. A gentle tapping became the knocker. A faint sigh of wind became the sleepy breath. These names weren't scary. They were almost affectionate, like nicknames for things that were simply part of the everyday world, and outside the mine, life continued its quiet rhythm. The town expanded, with more small homes built from rough timber, more smoke drifting from chimneys, more children running barefoot in the warm earth. The blacksmith kept hammering metal into shape. The bakery produced simple loaves that filled the air with a comforting smell. The evening stayed calm, with lanterns glowing behind cabin windows like tiny stars. People slept deeply in those days. With crickets chirping outside and the cool night breeze slipping through thin curtains. But every so often, a miner would wake before dawn and sit on his porch, looking at the dark outline of the hill. He might sip warm tea, feeling the quiet weight of the mine beneath the earth, and he would wonder, was something down there, or was it only the sound of the earth settling, breathing in its slow, ancient way? The legends never answered these questions. They didn't need to. In Gold Hill, the stories weren't meant to frighten, they were meant to explain the unexplainable in a gentle, human way. They were stories told slowly, shared softly, and passed down like a lullaby from one generation to the next. As the mine grew deeper, the legends would grow deeper too, and soon, the mysteries would become woven into the very identity of Gold Hill, quiet, enduring, and always just a little bit strange. As the weeks turned into months, and the months drifted quietly into years, the Gold Hill mine grew deeper and more complex. What began as a narrow entrance carved into the side of a gentle hillside slowly expanded into a web of tunnels that reached far beneath the earth. Lanterns flickered on wooden beams, dust drifted lazily through the air, and the cool underground wind slid along the passageways like a soft, slow breath. To the miners, the deeper levels of the mine felt like a different world. The moment they stepped down the wooden ladder or descended the slope into the lower tunnels, the air changed. It was cooler, stiller, and carried a faint mineral scent, almost metallic. Almost earthy, as if the rocks held memories of water, heat, and time. Their lanterns spread only a small pool of warm light, leaving the walls just beyond the glow in soft shadow. Sometimes the shadows seemed to lean gently inward, as if listening to the men who worked below. The echoes were longer down here, stretching each sound out into a drawn-out murmur that blended with the quiet hum of the tunnels. If a miner dropped a stone, the sound traveled in smooth, rolling waves, bouncing off distant walls. If someone called down the passage, their voice returned in a calm, muffled tone, like a memory being repeated by the mine itself. It was in these deeper tunnels that the stories began to take on a different tone, not frightening, but more mysterious, more dreamlike, as if the earth itself was stirring with old, slow thoughts. Miners often said the deeper levels felt older than the rest of the mine, even though everything had been carved at the same pace. There was a heaviness in the air, not oppressive but aware, like the mine was watching the workers with quiet interest. It wasn't unusual for a man to pause mid-swing, holding his pickaxe still, listening to something only he could hear. Sometimes it was a tap, sometimes it was a scuff, sometimes it was the faint click of stone against stone from a distant, unseen corner. Probably someone working in the next tunnel, the miners said. But when they checked, no one was there. One quiet evening, after a long day of work, a miner named Thomas told a story as the men rested near the central shaft. His voice was calm, steady, with no hint of fear. He described how he had been working alone in a newly dug passage, the lantern beside him throwing warm light on pale rock. He had just swung his pick when he heard a soft beat behind him, like someone knocking gently on the wall. He turned, expecting to see a coworker. The tunnel was empty. He shrugged and kept working. A moment later, the knock came again. Slow. Deliberate. Almost polite. Thomas laughed as he told the story. Was probably just the walls settling, he said. But even as he said the words, the other miners nodded knowingly. They had heard similar things. Maybe not knocks, but taps, or faint shifts, or the small sighs of the earth. There was also the story of the whisper corner. This was a bend deep in the mine where, if you stood very still, you could sometimes hear a breathy sound drifting from around the curve. It wasn't strong enough to be called a voice. It wasn't sharp enough to be wind. It was more like a soft hum, the kind you hear when you press a seashell to your ear. One miner joked that the corner was simply speaking its own language. Another said the tunnel was humming to itself. The name stuck. People began to refer to it casually, saying things like, "I'm working near the whisper corner today." But none of this frightened the workers. In the deep tunnels, these strange sounds became part of the routine. The men accepted them the same way they accepted dripping water, shaking lanterns, and echoing footsteps. The mine had its own voice, and the miners were used to hearing it. Some of the older workers even found the sounds comforting. They said it reminded them that they were never truly alone underground. The presence, whatever it was, felt gentle. It didn't mean harm. It was more like a quiet companion. Outside the mine, people in the town heard the stories and passed them along in soft, easy conversations. The general store owner liked to repeat the tales to travelers. Parents told lighter versions to their children, turning the sounds into friendly spirits or old miners who stayed behind to keep watch. One popular story said that the mine had absorbed the memories of everyone who worked there. Every laugh, every footstep, every song hummed in the tunnels had soaked into the walls, replaying softly in the deep dark. Another story claimed that the mine was simply settling into its new shape, stretching and adjusting like a living thing waking up from a long sleep. These legends were never spoken in frightened tones. They were told with warm smiles, slow nods, and the understanding that the mine was special, not haunted in a troubling way, but filled with echoes of human life. As the mine grew, so did its mysteries. New tunnels brought new sounds. Deeper levels brought stronger echoes. Sometimes lanterns seemed to flicker without a breeze. Sometimes dust drifted upward instead of down. None of it made sense, but none of it felt wrong. Even visitors who stepped inside the entrance for the first time noticed it. They'd stand just a few feet in and say, "Feels different in here." And the miners would smile gently and reply, "Yes. It does." The mine had become a character in its own story, quiet, thoughtful, and always listening. A place where the past lingered in soft echoes. A place where each new tunnel carried the calm whispers of the one before it. And as more years passed, Gold Hill's mine grew deeper still. The sounds became familiar companions. The legends became threads woven into everyday life. And the people of the town accepted it all with the same slow, steady peace that defined their days: quiet echoes, soft footsteps, gentle knocks, the sleepy breath of stone. They became as natural to the miners as the rising sun. But the story of Gold Hill was not finished yet. As the sun slipped behind the last line of hills, the old Gold Hill mine grew even quieter, settling into the deep stillness that only evening can bring. The tunnels felt cooler now, almost comforting, like the soft air of an old library where stories rest on every shelf. And in that quiet, it became easy to feel how many lifetimes had passed through these stone walls. All moving slowly now, as if time itself had stretched out for a long, peaceful yawn. When people in town spoke of the mine being haunted, they didn't say it with fear, they said it the way you talk about an old friend who never fully left, a presence that was gentle, familiar, and somehow reassuring, if you stood near the tunnel entrance at night. The air carried a very soft sound, something so faint you might mistake it for your own heartbeat. A tiny tap, like a pebble shifting. A slow exhale of cool wind rolling out of the dark. And sometimes, if you listened long enough, you might imagine hearing the rhythm of long ago footsteps. Not hurried, not restless. Just steady, as though someone was still calmly walking the familiar path home. Local historians believed these sensations were the natural breathing of the mountain, settling rock, shifting air, and the quiet work of water deep below. But the older families in town, the ones who grew up with stories passed down like bedtime rhymes, liked to think the sounds were the mine remembering. Remembering the people who carved its passages. Remembering the laughter that once echoed here. Remembering the hands that touched the stone with patience and hope. Whether you believed in echoes or in something more, it didn't really matter. The mine held its stories with tenderness either way. As the moon rose higher, its pale light brushed the old wooden beams, making them glow softly. The hillside looked calm. Almost sleepy itself. Nothing stirred except a distant owl drifting overhead, and the slow rustle of grass waving in the night breeze. Standing there, you could feel how small the worries of today were, how easily they slipped away when surrounded by such old, untroubled silence. The past didn't demand anything here. It didn't chase or cling. It simply rested, the way everything eventually does, and as the cool night settled in fully, the mind seemed to hum a quiet lullaby of stone and memory. An invitation to breathe slower, let go, and drift gently into rest, just as the hills had done for centuries. Thank you for wandering with me through the quiet paths of Gold Hill, a place where old stories move slowly, and the past rests as gently as the night breeze. As we leave the mind behind, picture the hills settling into their soft evening calm, the wooden beams glowing faintly in moonlight, and the echoes of long-ago footsteps fading into peaceful silence. Nothing follows you out of this story. Nothing lingers. Everything stays right where it belongs. Resting in the cool, still tunnels of time, all you need to carry with you now is the quiet, the steady breath of the hills, the soft calm of a world that has slowed down enough for you to drift with it, so let your eyes grow heavy. Let your thoughts loosen, let the calm of Gold Hill wrap around you like a warm blanket, and as the last echoes fade, I hope you find yourself gently sliding towards sleep, easy, slow, and peaceful. Good night, traveler. May your dreams be quiet, and may your rest be deep.